My name is Trey, and welcome to Telos Bound. I'm very sick today, so please bear with me if I sound a little, sick. So, today we'll be discussing Žižek's book, Hegel and a Wired Brain. This is the second part in this series, also the final part, and today we'll be focusing specifically on the fate of the subject in the face of developing neurotechnologies. If you haven't seen the first part of this series, I highly suggest you go watch it, as the stuff discussed there is necessary to know if this video is going to make any sense at all. Before discussing Žižek's predictions concerning the status of the subject in the Singularity, we must first remind ourselves of his distinction between the subject's unconscious and its inner life. The unconscious is the empty point of self-relating negativity, the unconscious reflexive withdrawal from the world which constitutes identity at its zero level. This unconscious is distinguished from the empirical wealth of personality, or the inner life of the subject, which is the equivalent of what Jean-Paul Sartre calls psychic states. The inner life is essentially the domain of all our thoughts, our emotions, and our fantasies, basically everything that makes us a human with autonomy, freedom, and personality. This inner life is what Žižek sees under threat from the Singularity. It's not a very complicated idea. It's rather obvious, actually. If all our thoughts are available to others and registered within some global hive mind, then obviously we have lost our private inner lives. Let's first talk about how communication will fare in the Singularity, or not even necessarily in the Singularity, just in a situation wherein our thoughts can be shared directly between minds without the mediation of language. Žižek references Elon Musk's Neuralink as an example of this. Musk seemingly sees the prospect of Neuralink as a stage of advancement in human evolution, when we finally get rid of language, which he sees as always being restricting and incapable of fully communicating the richness of one's own inner thoughts. Žižek notices a very simple problem here. What if thought presupposes language? Developments in psychology and linguistics seem to, at the very least, show that language is an intimate aspect of thought. As Žižek puts it, quote, Musk simply assumes that our thoughts are present in our mind independently of their expression in language, so that if I connect my brain directly with another's brain, the other individual will experience my thoughts directly in all their wealth and finesse, not distorted by the clumsiness and simplification of language. However, what if language in all its clumsiness and simplifications generates the elusive wealth of our thoughts? Yes, language reduces the meth of our thoughts to simple words and sentences. Say, when I say to somebody, I love you, the wealth of my feelings is reduced to a simple formula pronounced thousands of times every day. However, this very condensation of the chaotic wealth creates complex meaning. It evokes the rich texture of what is left unsaid. Unquote. The ability to simplify the complexity of one's thoughts is therefore the very precondition of meaningful communication. It is possible that thought without language is just a chaotic jumble of information, and that only in reducing this chaos into fixed symbols can we convey meaning. Thus, far from advancing our ability to communicate, a direct brain-to-brain connection may actually inhibit it. Now let us move on to discuss sexuality, which Musk also comments on in the context of Neuralink. According to Musk, Neuralink opens up new prospects of sharing sexual experiences, saving them in the cloud, direct brain-to-brain communication between two lovers, and etc. Of course, this is theoretically all possible, but what does the prospect of direct brain-to-brain communication entail? How would this affect sexuality? In order to answer this question, we must consider the role of ignorance in sexuality. Is flirting, for example, not entirely based on a form of ignorance, or at least the failure to directly communicate one's thoughts to the person one is flirting with? This manifests in what Žižek calls empty symbolic gestures, which have seemingly no direct connection to the object of desire, but are necessary to approach it at all. For example, imagine a man who has just gone on his first date with a woman, and they both get to his apartment building. If he were a sociopath, the most logical thing to do would be to directly ask her if she would like to come upstairs and have sex. However, if he were to do that, the erotic character of the situation would completely vanish. Here's a clip that I used in the first video on this channel of the late Norm Macdonald, who demonstrates the absurdity of failing to take part of these empty symbolic gestures.
I try to make it fast. Like if I see a girl drinking at a bar, right? I'll go up behind her. I'll go. I can get us a bottle. And that doesn't work very often. But sometimes
you just want to get right.
Yeah, I want to get right. Then I get the lady. I turn off all the lights in the room so it's pitch black, and then I lay down on top of her for 5-10 minutes, and I don't get a lot of return people.
Go well.
The comedy here lies in the fact that Norm is attempting to make a beeline towards the object of desire, but in this way he destroys all the eroticism that is imminent to the very action of attaining it. Now, does the prospect of direct brain-to-brain communication not entirely negate this dimension of eroticism? If I can directly read someone else's thoughts, there's no room for these empty gestures and games. As Žižek puts it, quote, "Can we imagine anything more stupid from the standpoint of successful reproduction than the tradition of courtly love in which the completion of the sexual act is endlessly postponed? So how could courtly love become the model of high eroticism? And what about our perverted games in which a particular object or gesture which should be constrained to a subordinated moment of erotic foreplay becomes the central feature, the focus of libidinal intensity which eclipses the big procreative act? Is this dimension of erotic mediation not threatened by a direct brain-to-brain link?" Unquote. We can go even further here. What if developing neurotechnologies will one day be able to chemically alter our brains to produce the most intense sexual experiences imaginable? Again, Žižek doubts whether this will truly be as successful in practice as it sounds in theory. To quote him once again, quote, "The prospect opened up by Neuralink is not just that of directly shared sexual experiences. Our normal experiences are rooted in body and language, but what if we imagine a direct arousal of the pleasure neurons in our brain, so that we experience a pure orgasm stronger than those achieved through bodily interaction and language of seduction? What would this pure orgasm amount to? What if, far from offering the impossible/real full satisfaction, the subject would experience here what, to borrow Platonov's term, one is tempted to call absolute tosca, the experience of the unbearable loss of mediation/detour? We get the desired thing itself, but without the network of mediations which makes it desirable." Unquote. Thus, we see here how the entire dimension of eroticism and sexuality is under threat by the prospect of Neuralink, and especially the Singularity, as they both negate the network of mediations which makes the sexual act desirable. Let us now discuss how developing neurotechnologies will impact the freedom of the subject. In the Singularity, when machine and human intelligence are merged in one collective consciousness, far from humanity increasing into a harmonious divinity, there is a strong possibility that we will be less free and more alienated than ever. This is because the distance between our thoughts and reality is the very basis of the perception of freedom. Every totalitarian regime in history has been incapable of truly negating this dimension of freedom. Even when the body is under direct manipulation and control, the mind remains free and autonomous. This is precisely what we lose in the Singularity. To quote Žižek, quote, "The distance between our inner life, the line of our thoughts, and external reality is the basis of the perception of ourselves as free. We are free in our thoughts precisely insofar as they are at a distance from reality, so that we can play with them, make thought experiments, engage in dreaming, with no direct consequences in reality. No one can control us there. Once our inner life is directly linked to reality, so that our thoughts have direct consequences in reality, or can be directly regulated by a machine that is part of reality, and are in this sense no longer ours, we effectively enter a post-human state." Unquote. Thus, to conclude this section with a brief summary, the prospect of direct brain-to-brain communication, its highest form being the Singularity, poses immediate threats to human communication, sexuality, and freedom. Without the mediation of language, it is very possible that communication itself becomes impossible. Without the distance between minds which allows for flirting, games, and other intimate acts, we lose the dimension of eroticism altogether. And finally, without the distance between one's inner life and another mind or machine, we lose our experience of ourselves as autonomous individuals. Thus, in the Singularity, the subject loses its inner life, and is radically transformed into a post-human being. But as we discussed in the previous video, the inner life of the subject is only one part of it. There also remains the unconscious. Before discussing the unconscious as such, let us first briefly touch on the virtual unconscious, which we discussed at the end of the last video. The virtual unconscious has to do with negative difference, such as the difference between coffee without milk and coffee without cream. This sort of purely virtual difference is essential to human communication according to Žižek. However, he doubts whether a machine, which only deals with positive properties and information, is able to register it. In this sense, perhaps the problem with singularity is not necessarily that it will be able to penetrate too deeply into our inner lives, but that it will be incapable of properly understanding us. This poses a theoretical problem for the singularity as it is conceived by someone like Ray Kurzweil. So virtual/negative difference is one aspect of humanity that will likely remain untouched by the singularity. But this isn't the only thing that will survive. According to Žižek, negativity itself, which is the subject, will survive as autonomous and untouched even after its thoughts and inner life are absorbed into the singularity. To introduce this idea, let us first discuss Žižek's notion of the fall as it is presented in the biblical religions. According to Žižek's interpretation of the Bible, the fall is a fall into finitude, alienation, and separation from God and the world. The subject is therefore fallen, being both internally divided and divided from external reality. However, does the idea of the singularity not precisely involve the overcoming of division and finitude? Ray Kurzweil conceptualizes the singularity as the unification of the material world and human intelligence by means of developing neurotechnology. In the singularity, the entire cosmos will be permeated with intelligence, and in this sense we will truly reach the absolute as conceived by German idealism. Spirit will be united with substance in the most literal sense. If the fall is the fall into finitude and alienation, is the unification between intelligence and the universe not the overcoming of the fall? Well, for Žižek, the reality is the exact opposite. To quote him, quote, "With singularity, we'll get a new fall, a kind of fall from the fall, a much deeper fall which will display the structure of the loss of a loss. In Hegelese, what if singularity will work as a negation of negation? A negation which gets itself negated, not by way of reverting to a new higher positivity, but by way of confronting us with a pure negation." Unquote. What does it mean when he says that in the singularity there will be a deeper fall which will, quote, "display the structure of the loss of a loss," unquote? In order to understand this, we must remind ourselves of the subject's internal division between its inner life and its unconscious, which constitutes its fallenness. Keeping in mind Žižek's belief that the unconscious is what remains untouched by the singularity, we can see what he means when he says that there will be a fall from the fall. Yes, the subject is internally divided, but when it has the freedom to play around with its thoughts, when it has control of its private inner life, it is able to have the illusion of being a unified human being with its wealth of personality. However, when the subject is deprived of this inner life in the singularity, the structure of division is on full display. It will be completely deprived of even the illusion of being a human being with a substantial personality and independent thoughts, emotions, and feelings. And now we have reached the central thesis of Žižek's Hegel in a Wired Brain. In the singularity, the subject will be deprived of its content or its inner life. This is true. All of its positive thoughts will be absorbed into the collective mind. However, according to Žižek, the singularity will be incapable of penetrating into the subject as the empty point of self-relating negativity, which is the Cartesian cogito and the Freudian unconscious. This minimal level of identity will remain, and it will experience itself as more alienated than ever. To quote him one last time, quote, "The subject that will survive will thus not be the bearer of the wealth of inner experience. All that wealth of feelings, passions, fears, dreams, and hopes, etc. could well be drowned in the collective space of singularity. The subject will survive as a pure barred S, the vanishing point of negativity, separated from all of its experienced content. In short, the subject will be divided more than ever, divided not between itself and its other, but divided in itself, between its content, separated from it, and the punctuality of the barred S, the barred 0 point of subjectivity." Unquote. The subject which is already divided between its inner life and its unconscious will no longer have the illusion of being a unity. In having its inner life lost to the singularity, it will remain as the void, the pure empty point of self-relating negativity. Personally, I find this prospect rather terrifying. Thank you for watching this video. I truly appreciate all the support I've gotten this past 2 weeks. I've been putting out content rather rapidly because I'm in a rather rare situation where I have a lot of free time, but unfortunately I'm not going to be able to keep this pace up. I'm going to shoot for a video every 2 weeks, probably every other Tuesday. Also, I'll probably run out of ideas for videos at some point, so please comment some suggestions. In the near future, I'm likely going to have some people on the channel to talk about philosophy, Christianity, and some other stuff, so look out for that. I think that's all, so thank you all once again for watching. Please like and subscribe if you enjoyed this video, and may God bless you all.